You may remember the song that Bobby McFerrin made popular back in the 1980s, Don't Worry, Be Happy. The song reached the top of the Billboard charts with its catchy little tune and easy to remember lyrics. Now, I have to admit, I remember thinking, that song is corny, and I did not understand the appeal that it had to so many people. But I can look back and see now why so many people would have listened to it and liked it so much. McFerrin said, here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note by note. Don't worry, be happy. In every life we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, be happy. The song attempts to give us release from the ways in which we worry about the things that go on in life. In every life we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, be happy. I think many of us can testify that that is the case, that worrying only compounds the problems that we have rather than releasing us to have real perspective and a sense of clarity about how to move through those problems. For the Disney fans in the room, The Lion King featured a song that was just as popular and just as simple. The movie had two characters named Timon and Pumbaa who lived out in the wilderness without a care in the world. Their motto was simple, Hakuna Matata. In the song, they explained that the words mean no worries for the rest of your days. Well, as popular as these songs have been over time, their reach and popularity do not compare to the ancient song that we encounter in the 23rd Psalm. I must admit that I am amazed by the timing of this scripture in the Christian calendar. For the lectionary, the Christian calendar that we follow, gives us this scripture as a Lenten text. And it comes, I think, as the right message for the right time. The 23rd Psalm is a song that is as known as any song ever written. I remind you that the Psalms are hymns. They're songs that the people of Israel sang for many occasions, for worship, for celebrations, when they traveled, when they gathered, for other kinds of ceremonies. They were songs that matched the experiences of the people who sung them and lived the issues that every person faces in life. The Psalms covered topics like happiness and sadness. The Psalms cover topics like world crises and fear, frustration, and anxiety. The Psalms even address the anxieties that you and I have in life. But the words that we have memorized in these famous songs are words that we do not always practice or take to heart. For when hard times come, sometimes we disregard the advice of these psalms and we go it alone in many ways rather than heeding the wisdom that has come to us from many generations. Now, I get it. The news, primarily for the purpose of ratings, flashes that red flag that states breaking news over the course of whole broadcasts. Our brains tell us that the message must be important. Our brains tell us that this is something that we need to attend to at this moment because there's a red flag on the screen. No wonder people are panicking. We have taken in these messages without pausing to make sense of their meaning. Not every message about the current crisis, the current virus that is the coronavirus, is urgent. But for an anxious person, the alerts are cause for hoarding and behaviors that we would not practice in our pre-coronavirus routines. You and I know that if you're old enough to have dealt with people, you are old enough to get anxious sometimes. We sometimes worry when people come late for something that we have planned. We worry about our jobs. We worry about our performance in school. We worry about our children's health and safety. We worry about our own health and well-being. We allow ourselves to be overly self-conscious and caught up with what people think of us, and we get anxious about money or the lack of it. We can get nervous about our relationships, and we can find ourselves concerned about our mortality. That list is long enough by itself without considering the other things that we sometimes add to it. But when we think about such things as whether we will live or die, it is something that will rob us of our joy if we are not careful. In the modern vernacular, I have to tell you, spoiler alert, we are all going to die. So the real goal is to make the most of our lives for the living of these days. I am the first person to tell you, though, that these matters are important to think about during the course of our journey. Yes, it is important to think about your money, to plan, to make sure that you have enough. It is important to be concerned about your children's health and well-being, their safety and their security. It is important to think about your own health and well-being, to make sure that you are eating right, to make sure that you are getting those checkups, to make sure that you are attending to those matters that are within your control. At the same time, though, the psalmist tells us that there are some things that we can just trust that God will be with us. There are all things that God will be with us every step of the way to ensure that you don't have to carry the whole burden alone. The psalmist helps us to place these matters in proper perspective. And when we think about the 23rd Psalm, many of us will associate it with a funeral procession. We will associate it with the words that we often hear at the beginning of funerals, or even preached as the scripture for the funerals. But this is more than a funeral psalm. This is more than a scripture that needs to come out at times of a funeral. It is a scripture, it is a psalm that invites us to live, knowing that God supports us in our lives. So really, my comments, my concerns, my observations beg one simple question. How can we overcome the worries and anxieties that sometimes creep into our lives and may overwhelm us if we are not careful? I just want to offer one point. We can overcome these worries and anxieties by trusting in the God who brought us thus far in our journey, thus far in our lives. The psalmist is clear about one fact. God is present through all of life's risks and problems, obstacles and disappointments. The song sets the tone in the very first verse by showing that God is the one who cares for us. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Then the range of activities that take place in the song show that God is present in every setting. God is there in the trying times and in the good times. God provides shelter and sustenance. God provides guidance and direction. God is there in the most anxiety-inducing moments of our lives. Listen to this. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. God, you prepare a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. God is there with us in those anxiety-inducing moments. In the shadow of death, the valley of shadow of death, while I walk through it, while I get concerned about my mortality. When there are those who mean ill and ill will for me and harm for me, God is there. So the real question is, how do we embrace that promise and live it? The theologian Howard Thurman stated well that there is something that is worse than death. To live in such a way that one cowers to the systems and forces that would suppress our full humanity, that is worse than death. To not live well is the tragedy of a person's life. To let our anxieties conquer us is to let our lives take on a purpose for which God did not design our lives. In the times of anxiety, God has the remedy. When I cannot rest due to the worries and troubles, God makes me to lie down in the tranquility of green pastures. God restores my soul after it is beat up by the nerve-wracking energy of nonstop cable television reports. When I fail to forgive myself for the mistakes and missteps that I've made in my life, surely goodness and mercy are not too far from me to prop me up and help me along the way. And I will find company in the house of the Lord forever. Even Jesus wrestled with the fears and anxieties of life. Facing an impending death, he cried out in a garden about that which consumed his soul. God, please let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. There are some things that are inevitable in life, my friends. We will face sickness and hardship. Death will knock on the door of our family and our friends, and one day our personal doors. Yet this psalm is one that teaches us how to live. Trust in the shepherd who has good intentions for you. Walk with your head held high, knowing that God is right there with you. The story is told of a community that hosted a public speaking contest. One contestant was a local politician who was known in the town for his diction and elocution and stirring speeches. He was a promising speaker who was starting to be recognized across the state. He recited the 23rd Psalm from memory and received a standing ovation. The judges were impressed. The second contestant was a much older man who showed the years of life in the lines on his face and displayed a disregard for the English language. He recited the same psalm by memory and emphasized different passages with a cadence and rhythm that moved the whole room. When he took his seat, there was not a dry eye in the house. Upon seeing the difference in reaction to the presentations, the first speaker questioned the older man. Why did they react with such passion to your presentation? You fumbled over words and failed to pause where there was obvious punctuation marks. I don't get it. We recited the very same psalm. The older man, a true man of faith, told the first contestant, you know the psalm, but I know the shepherd. My family, trust the shepherd who will see us through this moment, whatever you are experiencing in your life right now, whatever anxiety might be bubbling up in your soul. Trust the shepherd who will see us through this moment, even into the end of our days. Amen.